See, he's a gentleman already. He let me walk first up the stairs. It's a good start.
Yeah, no pressure. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. Appreciate you being here. Thank you, Dr. Gina Loudon.
My pleasure. Thank you. What a massive, just an honor. I'm so humbled that you would ask me, and a first woman thing. That's really, just thank you.
I appreciate it. Well, you know, I've gotten to know your husband over the last year, and you must really trust him. Because a complete stranger is going to interview you, and you know the kind of riffraff he hangs out with. So you never know where this could go, right?
34 years, I trust him pretty much, yeah.
That's good. Well, let's get right into it. You, television personality, a best-selling author, a political commentator. Let's dive right into the story of how you got started. What was it that made you pursue this industry? Or these various industries?
It was my husband. He was a state senator in Missouri, and we were at one point, I was talking to people would always, how they do, anyone involved in politics, they say, when are you gonna run, right? And so someone said that to me, and John said, you know where the real power is though? It's the people that get to talk about the people that run. It's the power of the pen and the power of the ink. And that just clicked in my brain, and I thought, it's not that I care about power at all, but I do care about influencing culture, and I care about the future of the world for my children. So I just started in radio right at that point. And I was always a writer. My mom was a writer. My mom was a beautiful poet, actually, and but also a writer. And my dad was very political on the other side of the aisle, so that's interesting. Very active on the other side of the aisle, but so I was raised in somewhat of a political household, but I didn't plan on having anything to do with politics until I realized that's really, there's a quote by Beverly LaHaye. I don't know, who knows who Beverly LaHaye is? I wonder if anybody still remembers. Okay, she was the founder of Concerned Women for America, and she said, prayer paves the way, but action possesses the land. And that's just another quote that I've always loved, because I thought, it explains it too, because we grapple with how much do we put into our time as a bank, right? How much do we put into our family? How much do we put into our work? How much do we put into our church? All of those things. And that laid it out for me. Yes, you need to be prayerful. Yes, you need to be looking to God all the time, but action is what actually changes the culture. Action possesses the land. So that really did affect me. So then I thought, I had studied psychology through 2 master's degrees and a PhD, and of course an undergrad, all at left-leaning universities, because that is pretty much all that's out there. Actually, my first master's degree I got at St. Louis University, which is a Catholic Jesuit university, which I thought might be a little Christian-y, but no, it wasn't. Just don't make that mistake, it wasn't. But that's okay, because I learned a lot from them. I learned a lot from my dad about how to deal with people that thought differently from me, how to get along with them, how to speak diplomatically with them. And that's really, I thought that I would be spending my life as a psychologist sitting behind a desk, helping one person at a time. And at some point it occurred to me, I think it was actually one of my professors that said, you can choose to be a counselor and sit behind a desk and help one person at a time. And it's a beautiful calling, and I think it is, for pastors or counselors who choose to do that, and that is their calling. But for me, I thought, I just want to figure out how to talk to a lot of people at once. And so that when I find out a truth, like a great quote by Beverly LaHaye or something, instead of saying it to one person at a time, maybe I can say it to 25 or 50 people at a time. So yeah, that's why media.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
You talk a lot about cultural issues and family. Tell me a little bit about your own family.
Yeah, well, I've been married for 34 years, I think it is. I've actually kind of lost track. It might be close to 35. No, 34. Yeah, I just did math. And to my husband, who was a former state senator, the best, sharpest political mind I've ever known in my entire life. And if there's ever a political question, if you've seen me doing any of the TV that I do or heard me on radio, then you know that those ideas probably mostly came from him. We met in college in my undergrad, and we were, I think about, compared to my children, who seem so much more grounded and intelligent, honestly, and doing great things, we were literal children, babies. And I mean this with all due respect and honor to our parents who are all dead now, which is a sad thing. I don't think I've ever said that before, but my dad just died in January. We were not really parented, so we had no clue what we were doing in life. We really had no clue. And we've sort of stumbled our way through God's grace in the paths He set before us and the challenges that He put in our path. And so we have 5 children. And when I was pregnant with my 5th child, whose name is Bo, and in fact, he's here, Bo Loudon, big influencer out there. He's my baby. And when I was expecting him, we had been trying for 10 years to adopt a child with Down syndrome because we both had worked in that community. My husband, even more than me, he's so committed. He liked working with the severely handicapped, and that was, you've got to carry them literally from thing to thing, and you can't tell if they respond to anything. You get almost no reaction. But my husband spent countless hours taking care of and loving on those people, and it was the sweetest thing, and one of the most endearing things about him. And I had worked at Camp Wonderland in Missouri. It's in the Ozark Mountains, and it's a wonderful camp, but it's all high functioning, people with Down syndrome, autism, those kinds of things. So we had agreed we wanted to adopt a special needs child, and we just thought somewhere along the way God would bring it to us, but He never did bring us that child. We'd even gone to Russia looking. We'd gone to the orphanages in Russia looking for a child with special needs that we could adopt, and God just didn't open the doors. And finally, of course, this always happens like this. We were just talking about God's timing over here a minute ago together. Finally, I had just miscarried twin boys, later miscarriage, and also then a single boy after that. And my doctor told me, look, you have 3 great children. Why are you concerned about having this 4th baby at the time? And I said, because, if it's God's will, that's what I want to do. And so I was 7 months pregnant, and I get a phone call on total bed rest with a subchorionic hemorrhage again, and told by my doctors that there's no way this baby would make it, this baby being Bo. That's when I got the phone call that there was a child available for adoption with Down syndrome. And my husband at the time was running statewide. He was that day negotiating his pro-life bill, ironically, with the governor of Missouri, who at the time was Andy Blunt. Andy Blunt. And he was there negotiating his pro-life bill, which how these things go if you're familiar with legislation. You think, oh, well, it's pro-life, and you had a pro-life majority and all those things. No. We had pro-life lobby groups against us on this bill because they didn't feel like they were getting enough credit, or because their hometown rep didn't get the sponsorship in the House. There's all these things that go into legislating that are so much more crazy and involved than I ever understood. So I called my husband. He'd told me not to call him that day. But if I were to call him, call 3 times in a row, and he'd know it was an emergency, and he'd step out of his meeting. So that's exactly what I did after they called me and told me about this baby that was available for adoption. They told me he was on a feeding tube, he was on a breathing tube, he had 10 congenital abnormalities, all of which I didn't even understand. The only thing I heard was Down syndrome. And they said, you're really adopting this baby to put your name on a death certificate, but at least he'll have parents when he goes to heaven. And so I didn't know what to do. And I'm already worried about this baby that I'm 7 months pregnant with, laying there on my sofa with my little girls making tea and all these home remedies. I was willing to try anything at this point to keep this baby. And I called John and I said, hi, honey. I said, I know you can't talk, but I said, I just need you to know I got this phone call, and there's this baby, and all of these things are wrong with him. He has Down syndrome, yes, but they said basically we're probably adopting him to put our names on the death certificate. And my husband said, call him back and tell him yes. Is there anything else? I said, but you're running statewide. You've got this, we've got that. We've so much going on, and I'm pregnant, and da-da-da. And he said, and I said, and most of all, I'm worried because he was running statewide, and I didn't want to disrupt the campaign, by an adoption in addition to my 3 children that were all toddlers in pregnancy. And he said, Gina, it's really clear, if we don't have enough room in our lives for this baby, then God does not need me in this office. Call him back, tell him yes, put your mom, my mom was a nurse, put your mom on the next plane to go take care of this baby. And oh, by the way, I have to back up a little bit and tell you, because this is a really fun part of the story. So when I had miscarried the twins, I was really broken because I had always wanted twins. My grandmother was a twin. I was a twin, lost my twin. My grandmother's twin also died of pneumonia when she was 2. I found out I was having twins. I mean, you can't even imagine the excitement. And I really wanted these babies. So when I miscarried them, and I'd miscarried before that too, but this one was really hard for me. And I was home alone in a brand new house, and I buried them alone by myself because John was in session at the time, out of town, down at the Capitol. And so this was just hit me really hard. So I called my best friend from high school, and I said, Niall, you won't believe this is what happened. And she said, she had just lost her husband in a plane wreck. He and his whole company had gone down. He started those concrete floorings, like you see now in all the hardware stores and everything. You could drive over with a forklift right after that was his company. It was called Concrete Coatings. And he'd gone down in a plane with all of them, and the whole plane died. And I'd just been there with her, going through this with her. And she said, if there's one thing I can tell you, God will restore what the locusts have eaten away. And I was like, so angry at her for saying that to me. How dare you put an expectation in my heart, a hope in my heart, that God was ever going to restore these babies that I had just lost, these little twin boys. How dare you say that? And she said, but she did say that, and I was mad at her for a long time for it. But so my husband's response when I called him at the governor's mansion that day, go get him right now. And he goes, by the way. And I said, what? And he goes, congratulations, you're the mother of twin boys. Because of course I was going to adopt this baby and get him at the same time as I was having this other boy. God did restore what the locusts have eaten away. So that's my family.
Wow, incredible. Where do we go from here? Okay, so you wrote a book, co-authored a book called What Women Really Want. Mm-hmm. It's an intriguing title. I can see some guys looking right now like leaning in. Tell me what women really want. So tell us about the book.
Yeah, I co-authored that book with Morgan Brittany, if you remember her, movie star, absolutely gorgeous woman, and Anne-Marie Morel, 2 beautiful conservative women, and we had strong opinions. We were sitting around the table one day and talking about how a lot of people just don't understand, and how we didn't even understand what we wanted when we were young women. And it is so true. I was just sitting around the table with both of my daughters today, ironically. My daughter Lily's here. My son Samuel just walked in, the one we adopted with Down syndrome. He's right back there too. Sammy, can you stand up and wave? There he is. Yeah, there you go, Sam.
Hey, Sam.
And anyway, and I was just talking with them about this, and we were talking about, that is such a hard thing to narrow down what women really want. But I think there are things that we're discovering, not just as individuals, kind of as we go through life and as we go through marriage, right? And as we have children, which absolutely sculpts us in the potter's hands. But also our culture, it seems to me, is learning a lot, especially lately. I'm really pleased that, for example, Budweiser was slapped down pretty hard, Bud Light, after running commercials, trying to confuse our young people about what God blessed them with as their own gender, which is one of the most fundamental things in our culture. I'm really also very frustrated with the emasculation of men in our culture. I feel like even often beautiful young Christian conservative girls want to say, men are this or men are that, and just, they hear it on Instagram, they see it on TikTok, but it's our cultural Marxism that wants to undermine the strength and beauty of the family and the relationship between men and women, and how perfectly God made that to fit together. It doesn't always feel perfect, but I was reading on one of my friends posted today, that she was having a wedding anniversary, and she said, marriage isn't found, it's forged. And I thought, that is so true. And it's true about friendship. It's true about relationships with our children. It's true about probably even our relationship with God in some ways. But at the same time, I think it's really important to note that, it's a constant learning process. And I don't think there's any one word that anyone can say about what women really want. There's no one sentence or anything like that you can break. My husband just walked in, Senator Loudon back there. Hi, honey. wave.
Yeah.
My family's late, but it's better than never. And now you guys know how it is to get to church. Because usually I'm yelling and completely losing all self-control trying to get everyone in the car. But I do think that there is one thing that my daughters and I talked about today, and I thought this was really poignant. One of my daughters was telling a story about how she had been dating someone, and that this particular boy was such a gentleman, and maybe there were some things about him that she didn't appreciate, but there were some things about him that she really did appreciate. And one of those was that he was such a gentleman. He opens her door. These things were just instinctive to him. And we were discussing this. My husband is one who, it doesn't matter who you are, if you're a woman and we're at dinner, he will stand up when you get up from the table and when you come back to the table. And he's always done this. And she was asking me, did his parents do this? And I said, no. They really didn't. This is really something he just did on his own, and I don't know where he learned it. Maybe we should ask him. But this was just a conversation that happened today. But it's one of those things that's just about that, putting the other person on that pedestal, because, you know, God is so clear about loving your spouse like he loves the church, like Christ loved the church. And then for the woman to fully submit. And the full submission thing, just let me tell you, that does not come naturally to me. And I know a lot of you in this room, and I know it doesn't come naturally to a lot of us, but it really is such a blessing that God put it that way in his word, because I think it gives us an instruction manual for what the ideal is, and then also the grace that comes when we continually fail in those notions. But the one thing that my daughter said to me that really stuck with me is that this particular boy was willing to change for her. And I thought, wow, that is really something. Because if there is one thing I've noticed, even about my own sons, and again, I'm not naming names, I have multiple sons and multiple daughters, so you guys will never know. It's like a shell game. You will never know which one I'm talking about, because they'd kill me. But that is powerful, because even with my own sons, I see them becoming, well, I watch football on this day, and I do this on that day, and I work with all men. It's TV industry. I mean, every single person in my control room is a man. My producer sitting right there is a man. And I can tell you, a lot of the men that I work with take some sort of pride in sometimes not even listening to women, but then when women do talk, sometimes saying things like, oh, it's a cat fight, or oh, you're just being emotional. Those kinds of comments, I think, are so damaging. And I think the healthiest relationships out there that I see are the ones where those sorts of comments are never made, where what she says, even if she's being emotional, that he comes alongside of her and he's in that emotional vehicle with her, maybe it's gonna go off a cliff, but he's gonna sit right there with her, and he's not gonna belittle her just for having that emotional moment. The reason the women have emotional moments, guys, and most of you probably know this really well, is because God made us, right? The nurturers. We're the ones that come underneath. We're the ones that know the secrets of our children a lot of times that maybe they don't tell dad because they maybe don't want to seem weak to dad, right? Or they worry about, dad being the disciplinarian or those kinds of things. So there are just differences, in how God made us. And I think that's where so often men and women, boyfriends and girlfriends, fiancés and fiancées, husbands and wives, producers and show hosts, pastors and clergy, right, can run into trouble because we are made differently. So the moment that we can come together and say, isn't it so beautiful that God made us so differently that right now we are not connecting. You don't understand me and I don't understand you, but there's beauty in that because that's the way God created it. If we start there, then maybe that's a good place to go. Maybe that's a good place to go. I don't know.
That's good.
I wrote a whole book and I still don't know.
We got some clapping here. Some men are clapping. Well, your husband's here, so you're probably just going to rattle off all of his character traits and virtues. But
do you want false or do you want?
So how can a man be attractive to a woman? What are the character traits and virtues
I love that
women
question.
should look for?
Yeah, because there is a fine line. This is another thing my daughters and I were discussing. They're going to kill me. But, there is a fine line because no woman wants a man that's weak, but every woman wants a man that can be vulnerable and honest with her. I had a counselor one time say to me, if in every confrontation you can just remember the words kind and honest, just kind and honest. If you can be kind and honest, that will get you everywhere. And my poor family, if they've heard this said to them 1,000 times, they've heard it 100,000 times. I'll say, let's just be kind and honest right now, because if you can do those two things, then you really can get anywhere, right? I mean, if you're being honest, that's going to immediately cause the vulnerability I'm talking about. That's going to immediately cause prevent any future problems, because we so often aren't being completely honest, even with ourselves. So if we can be kind and honest every time we approach a disagreement or a conversation, I think it's just another great place to start within that realm of God created us differently and it's beautiful. Let's start there. But I think that today's culture, and I really want to speak to this because this is what probably gets me more angry than just about anything else, so you'll excuse my ire, but the emasculation of men in our culture has got to stop, and we have to be the ones that stop it. And I won't get political tonight, though I am very political, and proudly so, but I will say that I think our culture just voted on emasculation. And I think that we do want, in fact, real men, even when they're clumsy, even when they're fallen, even when they make terrible mistakes, even when they're crass, right? Even if they send mean tweets, we still want real men over the beta males that this culture has so endorsed, and I, for the life of myself, can't figure it out. No real woman wants one of those beta men. Let me just start right there. So something is wrong with the women in our culture, that they haven't been parented or they have daddy issues. And listen, I'm beginning of the line on daddy issues. That was my husband's phone going off, I think. I'm beginning of the line on daddy issues. That is absolutely the truth. My dad left my mom when I was 2. It was tragic. It was awful. I have all the issues. So I'm not, this is not condemnation on anyone. Really, it's not, because I really would be at the front of the line on just about everything I'm criticizing right now. But I also noticed that when we emasculate men, when we even tolerate our daughters for a second to emasculate, or our students, or our congregation to emasculate men, even just a little bit, it diminishes their ability to trust that they'll ever find a man that they then can trust, right? So that's where I get really, really riled up, because I really think it's so important that we don't. And I'm from, and I'll just tell you this straight up, my mom and my grandma loved to talk about how great women are, how strong women are. They were anti-domestic goddesses, they like to call themselves. They didn't cook, they didn't clean, they didn't do any of that. I love my mom, my grandma. Anybody who knows me knows I absolutely treasured them, still do. But those kinds of things that we kind of went through in the 60s and 70s and even 80s to some degree are the reason why we have a guy dressed as a girl on television trying to sell beer to our children. So we have to take responsibility for that, and there has to be a zero tolerance policy on emasculation of men going forward in our culture, I believe. And again, I think our culture just spoke loudly on this, and I'm very encouraged about that.
You've talked about a woman wanting a man who stands for something.
Yeah.
Tell us about that. What does that mean for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, women want to be led. Period. We want to be led. And even if we don't seem like we want to be led, one of my daughters in our conversation today said, I don't seem like the kind of woman that would want to have her car door opened. Because she comes off as a very strong woman. And I know many of you in this room, and many of you in this room come off as very strong women, but we still want our car doors open. We have to teach our sons that. We still want you to lead, and it's more than about opening car doors or standing when someone sits down or stands up in a restaurant. It's about, making sure that that woman, here I go, getting into all the controversy, and I don't mean to, but if she wants to work, great, but if she wants to stay home and be a mom, doing everything in your power to make sure that she can do that, or grandma, or whatever she wants to be, right? Those are the ways that I'm trying to teach my sons to lead, and that is never easy. It's always, teaching a young man to lead, I think, is probably the hardest thing we do, especially as moms, I'm sure as dads too, but I can't really speak for you because I've never been one. But I think teaching my sons to lead, so I am constantly sending my sons, my poor sons, they get, Instagram posts from websites like yours, quotes that I find, scripture constantly that I find, music that I find, anything I can find to support what it truly means to lead. But that leading, at least in my opinion, it's the biblical, it all goes back to the biblical leadership. It all goes back to leading like Christ led the church, being willing to actually die for what you believe in, which is the hardest thing in the world to teach my sons. Like, I don't want to teach my sons, run into that burning building, or enlist in that military branch, or even get into politics. Everyone who knows me knows, I don't want my kids in politics. Please get out, please run for your life. Do anything else and I'll respect it, but please don't get into politics because it's a bloodbath. But at the same time, if we want them to lead, we have to be honest with them and say, that might be a good way and that might be the way God calls you. I think God's calling, though, is probably the key, right, to leadership for a man. And being a good father, there's nothing, can I use the word sexier? There's nothing sexier than a good dad. Nothing I can think of that is more penetrates my soul, honestly, than seeing a dad go gaga over a brand new baby, right? Is there anything? I mean, I saw it on my husband's face, I've seen it on my friends' faces, but the thought of seeing it on my son's faces, I can't even imagine. That's beautiful. That's the essence of who we are, right? As people, what God made us, right? Mm.
Well, on that note, you wrote a book called Ladies and Gentlemen, and you talk about virtue and character and humility and all these, what I think a lot of people here would deem as old-fashioned. I joke around a lot, and I've said this before, that vintage gentlemen, everybody goes,
it's the best name ever. Don't you guys love Vintage Gentlemen? I think it's great. Yeah. Best name ever. Right away, I want to hear everything they post or
Well, that's good. Okay, guys. Thank you. So I joke around because vintage gentleman doesn't mean old dude.
Right.
It sounds like that, but it actually came from a quote from Os Guinness. And he said, sometimes in order for society to move forward, we have to go back. So the vintage part's the going back.
Yeah.
And the going forward part would be this concept of gentleman, bringing back some of these old-fashioned values. Speak to that a little bit, referencing your book. Mm-hmm.
Well, I wrote that book with Dr. Dathan Paterno, who is a psychologist in Chicago and a good friend of mine, an old friend of mine. And we just like the book, What Women Really Want, with my friends Anne-Marie Morell and Morgan Brittany, Dr. Paterno and I were literally just discussing like the horrible things we saw in our practices. And I remember telling him that I was doing some school counseling for an elementary school, and there was a sex ring that was confessed to me by a 4th grade girl in my counseling office. And I mean, at first I just didn't even believe her. But then one by one, I brought the other students in, and it was absolutely true. They were having sleepovers. They were in the 4th grade, and it was a sex ring. And it was guys and guys and girls, and even some brothers and sisters. I'm not lying. And this was happening in this elementary school, and no one knew about it except me. And I was like terrified, and I couldn't believe it. And so Dr. Paterno was telling me some of his worst client stories, and we were talking about what is really wrong. And what is really wrong is exactly what you were addressing, every single podcast, every single post, and what many of you are addressing in your churches. And that is just and I want to make sure and say something, because something came up on my show today, actually. I host a show every day from 8 to 10 on Real America's Voice. It's on right before Steve Bannon does War Room on Real America's Voice, if you're familiar. And my show is called American Sunrise. And we were talking today about this term woke. And we're using that word a lot. And I can't even remember, I wish I could give credit. We have great pastors on every single day, and I just can't remember who said it or if it was one of my co-hosts. But somebody said, We shouldn't use that term. Oh, it was David Brody. You might know him. He's one of my co-hosts. And he said, we shouldn't call it woke because that's another word they've changed, like stealing our rainbow, like so many of the things they've stolen in our culture. They've changed the word Marxist or socialist or communist, which is okay and still legal to say, by the way, to woke. And the whole idea of cultural Marxism, for those of you who don't know, is to rip apart the family, rip apart the church, rip apart. Remember when we used to, charity used to happen in the church? Charity used to happen in the neighborhood. Charity used to happen within families because families all lived close together and mom and dad and everybody took care of everybody, right? Remember that? Now charity happens through government. That is by design. That is not wokeism. That is cultural Marxism. That is a political system that is trying very hard to infiltrate and take us over from within. And here I just got political again. But that is what's happening in our culture, and they have to undermine the family. They have to have broken families. That's why they instituted the welfare state. That's why we have families divided in our cities. That's why where all of these principles have been administered and put into law, our families and our churches and our neighborhoods have fallen apart. It's because of cultural Marxism. So the challenge from David Brody today on my show this morning was to stop saying woke and to start calling it cultural Marxism. It's a lot more syllables, but it might be important as we go forward and as we talk to our churches, and as we, as some of you speak from the pulpit, to acknowledge that this is an actual attack from within that is happening right now. They are implementing Alinsky's tactics. If you haven't read Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, please read it. It's absolute required reading. But these are the things, and the diminishment of the male and female role are so important. So first, they decided to emasculate you. That's what happened in the 70s, right, with all the hippies and all that. They decided to emasculate the men. But now they've attacked women. Now they want to put boys in women's locker rooms. Now they want to put boys on the sporting field with your daughters, and they want to take away what it means to be feminine. Let me ask you a question. How can they tell us they want women's rights when they can't even tell you what a woman is? So these are some of the arguments where we need to make sure our children and grandchildren and nieces and nephews and folks in your church are equipped to make when it comes to facing it, because they're going to keep facing it. And I would say one more thing about this too, if I may, and that is, if at all possible, I would beg you to homeschool. I would beg you to homeschool. I know we have a lot of great private schools around town here, but if at all possible, and you homeschool. My girlfriend, when I started looking at homeschooling, and I've done both, I've done it all. My kids, most of them have gone to at least a couple of years of school so they could beg me to come back home so I could quit dealing with the rebellion of homeschooling. All the other kids get to go to school. Okay, you go ahead and go for a year. We'll see what you think. But each one of my children that I did ultimately send to school would beg to come back home. And I'm thankful for that. But my girlfriend who mentored me in this, and this isn't Sam Sorbo, but Sam Sorbo is another one who mentored me in homeschooling, said to me, if you want to hold their hearts, there's one surefire way. And I can honestly tell you that each of my children, I feel so blessed, and it is only by the grace and mercy of God himself, because Lord knows I did so much wrong, and my kids could tell you a whole list of things, and they do quite often tell me, but at least I have their hearts. They do talk to me. I am close to every single one of them, and I'm so thankful for that, and I really, really do attribute that to homeschooling most of their school careers. So that's another thing I think that goes along with, I don't even remember your question now, but it's definitely a big chapter in each of my books, for sure.
That's good. I went out and did some man on the street last weekend, and I was asking similar questions. You know, what is a man? What does a woman want in a man? Et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I found it interesting that a lot of people were even afraid to answer the question because of the narrative of the culture. I read in your book that you focus on graciousness and civility, even in high stakes arenas. And I think it's important that as we're out, because as I'm asking these people questions, you have to get past their defenses first, and let them know that you care. There's that old adage, they don't care what you know until they know that you care.
Yes.
And so talk a little bit about graciousness and civility even in high stakes arena, especially in politics too.
Yeah, it's hard in politics because the other side, I feel like the Marxists out there, and I'm not even speaking about a political party because I hate to tell you this, they're on both sides, they're all over the place. They can lie, they get to lie, and we don't. And it makes debate really difficult when the other side can just lie about you. They can say whatever they want to get under your skin and push your buttons, and you can't lie because you're held to that column of truth, right? But I do find, and I learned this from my dad. My dad was a big leftist. We used to sit around and we'd listen to Paul Harvey. Who remembers Paul Harvey? Yeah, everyone's like, boomer. Well, we'd listen to Paul Harvey in his medical office, and we'd be assembling he was an inventor also, and we'd be assembling his little things. We'd be listening to Paul Harvey every day, and then we would debate the issues that Paul Harvey talked about after he was done. And you know, my dad, for all of his views, which were absolutely counter to all of my views, he was always honest about it. He was always, almost always, loving in his approach to it, at least initially, until it got heated. But he was always gracious about it, and he really meant what he said, and he really believed what he said. So if we can go into every argument like that, every time we talk with someone who disagrees with us on faith, disagrees with us on politics, disagrees with us on parenting, whatever it might be, doctrine is a big one, at least in my world. If we can go into it like that perhaps everything they're saying to us, just because we've heard some in their position lie, give them the benefit of the doubt that in this conversation, they're being kind and honest, they're not lying, right? And that they're gonna be gracious too. And if we can just do that, then I feel like it starts us off on the right foot. If we don't, and I think praying for people too before you debate them is so important, but if we don't do that, then we're automatically going to presume that they're the enemy and our defenses are up, and we give them permission in a way to be that ugliness that we've seen, right? If you expect the best from people, I feel like so often you're going to get the best from people. And not always, certainly, but you know, God really doesn't ask us to be defensive. God doesn't ask us to be ready for the meanest fight, right? God really does ask us to try to love our neighbor as ourselves. And so if you start from that place, that's a good place to start. Now, I'll be one that'll go dig up scripture when people are getting into this turn the other cheek and all of the arguments I hear in our culture today where I feel like people aren't fighting back, people aren't speaking truth because they're somehow intimidated because they think that God said all we have to do is go to church and quote nice, pretty scripture. Because there's a lot of scripture that actually isn't very pretty. And I always encourage people to read the scripture that isn't pretty. And read it to where you memorize it like you memorize all the beautiful ones. Like, right, we all know Proverbs 31, right? We all know the Psalms and the Proverbs, but maybe go and read some of that stuff that is hard to read and try to figure out what God was talking about there, because I think when we do that, it will show us, to quote Sun Tzu, the art of war, the real art of war, though, in the battlefield that is not of flesh and blood. Because none of the battles we fight are flesh and blood. You guys know that, right? And so I think starting there with the spiritual warfare, that armor is important too.
So, then as gentlemen, we talk about what it means to be a gentleman. You're teaching your kids how to be gentlemen, your boys. Your husband's a gentleman. Give us a description of what it means to be a gentleman, somewhere between, holding a door open and then pulling out a sword to duel.
It's both, right? I mean, don't you think it's both? It's really both, and it's all the in between. And it's that husband who's, willing to get up in the middle of the night with a baby and change the diapers, right? And it's that husband who is willing to laugh with you and cry with you, even when he doesn't really know what you're laughing or crying about. Is anybody been there? Where you're like, what's wrong, honey? I don't know. Did you guys ever see that video, The Nail? Raise your hand if you've seen that. There's this woman, this is my favorite video of all time, and she has a nail in her head. And her husband, she's very upset and she can't figure out why. And she's trying to explain. She's like, I don't know. I just feel like there's this sharp pain and I don't know, but it's something and it's a pressure and it's there. And he's like, well, yeah. He knows he can't say there's a nail in your head. And if you get the nail out of your head, you wouldn't be feeling this pressure. So great and such a great illustration of what it means to really be a gentleman. It's just to kind of, I always use this term, but just to come into that place with her, to get in that with her and to not try to change the fact that she's got the nail in her head, but just try to talk her through, maybe so she can realize the nail in her head is there. And I think that it really is sort of the essence of being a gentleman. It's my mom used to say, loving you in spite of things, but because of most. It's the little things too. My husband, I remember, he still does it. He'll draw these little stick men on like birthday cards and things like that, but on everything. Like I would get them on my mirror and they were little stick men, like, I'd flip for you. I know you never actually said that. I don't even know why I made that up. I can't remember what you put, but it's really cute. And just the little things that, the funny things. And I think laughing is really an important part of being a gentleman. A sense of humor is really important because if someone doesn't have a sense of humor, then what are you going to do? You got to laugh. You really have to laugh. And I think half the time, don't you? If you can laugh about it, you can move beyond it. Like so often, don't you feel that way? So I don't know. It's a lot. Being a gentleman is not an easy thing. That's why I'm so glad you're tackling this instead of me.
Yeah. Well, we always say that it's not the destination; it's the journey. So I wouldn't say that I've arrived. I'm on a journey to becoming a gentleman.
But isn't that the most important part?
Yeah.
That that you're not like, I'm there, but you're like, I'm on a journey. That's the most important part, because aren't we all on a journey till the day we die?
Yeah, and it makes me think about, leadership and mentoring and, people who have had experience in life to come alongside of younger folks who might not have it. Speak to the importance of that. I know that obviously as a mother, you're doing that with your children, but I think if men and women who do have some life experience actually thought more about pouring into the younger generation, we could really help shift the tide in this cultural moment, especially right now as we're, where we are in life.
Yeah, I think mentorship is a really special calling, and I've got my friend here, Kevin Huffman, who's one of the best. This guy, I am not lying. We will walk into, I'm not kidding, we've traveled, they're our best friends, moved here from California. And we will walk into, a place you wouldn't even go in, right? We'll be traveling, and you stop in some place to grab sodas or whatever. And Kevin's the one who, 2 hours later, there we are in the parking lot, still waiting for Kevin to come out of the said, shop where he has found 3 young men or girls to talk to and mentor. And I'm so impressed by that. I tell you, it is such a special calling, and it's a constant calling for those who are really hardcore called. Kevin is really hardcore called because he does it all the time everywhere he goes. He disappears for hours on end and we're like, where is he? And but what a special thing and what a gift. And just the other day, I was warning him about someone. I was like, this person, I don't know, they just kind of came out of nowhere and I don't trust. And I'm skeptical and cynical because I've been around politics for way too long. So you really don't want to take any advice from me probably. But, and I'm telling him about this. And then we invited him over and he said, I can't tonight. I have dinner with a friend. And I'm like, oh, well, who was the friend? He's like, well, it was the person you told me not to be around. I'm like, of course it was, because that's who you are. Beautiful that he took my advice that this person really needs help and might not be very stable, and he turned that into an opportunity to love on that person. And that is so beautiful, and that's so gentlemanly and so masculine and all of those things. And one of the many reasons why I love Kevin Huffman. But I really am so inspired by people who are really good mentors. I don't feel like I am. I feel like I have 5 children and a whole audience that I take care of, and they're very high maintenance, and a husband and some producers. And so I feel like I'm not very good at mentoring, but I do feel like it's but I do feel like it's also a calling. And if you feel stretched thin, I don't think you add to your plate, oh, I need to do this now. But if it's what God calls you to do, then it's what God calls you to do. You know, I have a girlfriend right now who, her daughters are alienated from her at the moment. She's in a divorce situation, and she is a strong Christian, and she recognizes that this is a good place for her daughters to be right now, that they really should be close to their fathers right now because of some other things going on in their lives. And so what did she do? She began fostering drug-addicted babies. And she got a drug-addicted baby last week that had a stab wound in his face, burn wounds on him, shook constantly. And she said, you know, I just hold him all night. I just hold him all night until he stops shaking and he finally goes to sleep, because I figure he's probably not going to get that again anytime soon, because he's obviously going to go into the foster care system. And babies need that, you know, they need that loving and holding and the one-on-one. And she does this over and over. She buys all these things. It's just the sweetest thing. And I thought, what a special calling. How to use your maternal skills, because you know the Bible says, and I know you all know this, but the Bible says, blessed is the woman who is barren, for she'll be the mother of many. And my friend's not barren, just her daughters have been temporarily, I'm sure they'll circle back, but they've been temporarily sort of, you know, distanced from her a little bit. So she took that and said, what can I do with that? God, where would you have me in that? And I personally can't imagine at this age taking on a baby that is drug addicted and been abused, but that's what she's doing, and it's beautiful. So I think mentoring can look like a lot of things, sure. You know? Foster care is certainly one. Adoption is my passion. I'd love to help families adopt special needs children, and if you guys ever know of someone who's trying to adopt, it's so expensive, it's prohibitive for young families. It was prohibitive for our family, and so we try to help people with that. So if you ever know anyone, please find me. I'd love to help with adoptions. But it can look like a lot of things, but I think it is so important to make your mark on the next generation. And I just know that everyone in this room does. I just know they do. I'm looking at faces and I'm feeling spirits here, and I'm like, yeah, you guys, you're on top of all this stuff, I can tell.
I read about your eclectic collection of pets. So
yes.
You have a lot going on in your life. I grew up.
You had to bring that up?
Well, you know, I'm thinking about like teachable moments, and there's got to be something in there with all your pets.
I do. This is another way. My husband is a very tolerant, very patient gentleman, because I take in every animal that I find, and it doesn't matter if snakes, lizards, spiders, rabbits, chinchillas, dogs, cats, birds. Pretty much, is there an animal I haven't named that's still legal in the county? I don't know. Bunnies. Did I forget bunnies? I'm sorry, honey. Yes, bunnies. Just took a bunny last week. She is 6 years old, and I named her after one of my audience members, and her name is Tam the bunny, and she's blind, and she's sweet, and she's 6.5, and she gets to live out her life at our house. But I don't know why God gave me that calling. Honestly, it's a little embarrassing. I am embarrassed. There's a difference somewhere between hoarders and people who are just eccentric and like to adopt a lot of animals, and I'm somewhere in that continuum, and we'll just leave the rest to some Venn diagram somewhere. I don't know. But yes, I do. I do love to take in animals. I don't know, the quiet of them inspires me. I don't know, there's just something spiritual about animals to me, and I like being around them.
More nurturing.
Yeah, maybe it's that. That is probably what it is, honestly. I need grandchildren, okay? I really need grandchildren, and none of my children are accommodating this yet, so yeah. That's
good. We talk a lot about purpose. And Vintage Gentleman, explain to me a little bit about how women would, need a man that has a clear purpose in their life.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you're going to lead, then obviously you have to know where you're going, and it has to be somewhat defined. And I think the security issue for women is so important, feeling protected and feeling secure. And part of security is knowing, like, where you're going, right? So I think that, I hate to say purpose-driven life, because we all remember that title, but having that purpose and having that drive and the family being able to feel and count on that are blessings to wives and blessings to children, and ultimately, I think just a great way to sort of, I struggle a lot with those who say, with the name it, claim it doctrine, because I think that there has to be such a humility, right? It can't be, this is my purpose, this is my vision, this is what I'm doing, because best laid plans, right? Make God laugh, right? So I think that it has to be, in communion with God and with the flexibility of, my wife might bring home another stray animal today, and I only think I'm going to dinner with my friend, right? Or a stray child, that happens too. I drag home stray children from time to time as well. So I think it has to be balanced, right? But as long as it's, that upward focus, and with God always at the helm, and with your face really in the Word, not just in prayer, but in the Word. I've noticed a lot of Christians lately, especially a lot of young Christians, they talk about their prayer life, and they talk about doing intercessory prayer, and they talk about all these things, and then you realize that they really don't spend a lot of time actually in the Bible. And I am going to say, again, me at the front of the line on guilty here, it's not a perfect rhythm for me either. My best friend here, Michelle, she absolutely has her face in that Bible. I mean, I think like 10 hours a day. I'm not even kidding you. She is so in her Bible all the time. So anything I do is always going to pale in comparison to her. But I think if, staying really focused on God's purpose for our lives, which might change without notice. We all see these people. I mean, look at Elon Musk right now. I mean, he just grew up in such weird circumstances, and I think he's searching. I don't think he understands exactly who God is. I don't know him personally. I've met him. But I think, you look at what he's done in this world and what he can do with just following the calling that God gave him, and it can be world-changing. World-changing, and that's not different from any one of us. God called so many people out of such bizarre circumstances scripturally. I love reading all of those stories, and I love trying to figure out, where they were before that, because we all talk about Paul, once he was saved, but what about Paul before he wasn't saved, and Moses and all the rest of them, and so David, the list goes on. So I really love looking at where people are and trying to imagine, what if God? What if you could insert God into Elon Musk or whoever, you name anybody, George Clooney, I don't know, I'm just making people up right now. But it is interesting to imagine the perfection that is really in them when they know Christ. And I think that is such a beautiful way to approach people, especially if you're scared to meet them. Do you guys ever do this? Where you're meeting somebody who's really important, and you say, but I want to see what Christ sees in them. And then it makes them so approachable, doesn't it? You're like, oh, I see. Yeah, I love that.
You mentioned in your books, men and women have living together and having complementary roles. What does that mean, working together and their lives complementing one another? Yeah,
I mean, I spoke to this just a little bit at the beginning, but I do think, we are to fit together like puzzle pieces. Our strengths, I think when God said, that our weakness is made perfect in his strength, the meek shall inherit the earth, all of this is talking about how beautiful the difference is, finding the beauty in the differences. And the difference in the genders is so incredible if we really could see them. And don't you think at this point, some of the differences in the genders have been so watered down that maybe it's hard for us to see them? And the Bible talks about how, what we can see is really only a fingernail slice of what God sees. And that, I believe, has been watered down to even less than that as far as what we can see in our society today, between the differences between the genders and how beautiful that is when it fits together perfectly. But we have all seen it. I mean, Christ in the church is the perfect example, but there's also just beautiful marriages out there. You see the guy like you'll see on Instagram or somewhere, you know, the guy who's sitting there, you know, and they've been together and they're into their 90s or 100s and they're still together and they're still in love. And my children say all the time, they just want to be that couple that's walking on the beach together, holding hands in their 90s or 100s. That's beautiful. And that's people who figured out how their differences fit together into something that God intended as beauty. I think that's it.
I talk to a lot of men and they feel overwhelmed in life at times. There's statistics out about loneliness, there's suicide rates.
Much higher for men, yeah.
Yeah. Why do you think that is, and how can men find ways to not have those feelings of being overwhelmed?
Yeah, well, of course it comes back to faith for sure, but I also do think it comes back to the cultural emasculation that's happened to men, and I just have to say this, and I'm really trying not to be political tonight, but the way that our government has taken over the role of men in the family and has taken them out of the family, and that's so much of what a man's purpose is his family. Men were made by God to lead a family, and if they can't lead a family, because government has taken that away from them and the tools just aren't there anymore. You know, you can't compete with government, you know, paying for the house, paying for the kids, you know, paying for all the things, right? So what's your purpose then at a certain point? And good friend of mine, I love, Jack Brewer, speaks to this all the time on fatherlessness. And his contention is that fatherlessness is literally responsible for every single societal ill we experience. And I'm not sure he's wrong about that. I can't think of much that fatherlessness doesn't contribute to, but God can definitely fill those spaces. And I think helping men understand that, how God can fill those spaces of desperation, of even you know, suicidal ideation, those kinds of things. I had a lot of friends commit suicide. I don't think that speaks very well to me. It shouldn't have made that sound like it did. But I have had a lot of friends commit suicide, and so I've been through. I've had relatives as well. I've been through this. It seems like just too many times, and I can say that, you know, it really does come down to, yes, there's mental illness, but there's still prayer, and yes, there is, you know, there's just always a flicker of a light there if we can help them see it. And, you know, the light shines the brightest in the darkness. So if we know somebody who's in that darkness, you know, just be that light that shines if you can. And I mean, obviously, I hate that our veteran suicide rate is so high. I hate that, you know, men commit suicide so often. And I wish there were really good answers. I worked a suicide hotline for a long time. It was a really horrible, hard thing to do. One of my best friends did kill herself just last year. And so I don't know the answers on that, but I think that being quiet about it doesn't help. Addressing it does help as a culture and as a society, and restoring our culture to where men can be men and women can be women. I can't even guess how far that could go. You know, someone was talking about what just happened in our body politic and saying, you know, it was sort of a bloodless revolution, but in one way, it was one of the bloodiest revolutions we've ever had. Because you think of the lives lost during COVID, you think of the things that have been lost on our culture, in our culture because of what has been imposed on it, the immorality and the confusion on our children and all of those things. And it really wasn't bloodless at all. There was really a lot of bloodshed. You think of the 300,000 children that are missing from our border. You think of the children that have been trafficked, you know, by cartels. Not bloodless, not bloodless at all. We didn't have a war per se, but you guys, we've had a war. We have fought a war, and thank God that we do still have men in our culture who are willing to stand and fight that war that is a spiritual battle, because it is not an easy one. I would never want to be a man. I can't imagine what you guys have to deal with. I really can't imagine it. I feel bad every single day for the men in our culture. I do, and I feel responsible for it in a way, because I feel like women haven't done our role well either. Yeah,
how do we unpack that? as men, we're raised with a certain mindset of what a man is. It's pretty stereotypical a lot of times. We don't hear a lot about vulnerability, empathy, words that are not comfortable. In some circles, they're bad words for men. How can a man be the strength and attractive person that a woman's looking for, and at the same time find a place where they express those types of feelings that we're often culturally not allowed, it's not welcome that we would express those things.
Well, it's both sides of masculinity that aren't really allowed in our culture in some levels, right? Like, your toxic masculinity, if you want to protect your family by learning how to shoot a gun, then you're toxic masculinity. But if you cry, we're going to tell you that you're weak. So what do you do how do you raise yourself? I get really beside myself when I try to talk to my sons about who they're supposed to be, because this world has taught them so many lies. And I don't really know. And I will say this, as God-fearing Christian young men today, I don't know where to tell my sons to go. Sometimes my son will say, well, I'm interested in doing this. And I'll say, you'll never get that job. You just won't. It's going to go to a hire that looks like this and has this kind of person as their partner in life and isn't a Christian, and you're not going to fit that mold. So don't even try. I mean, that's a terrible thing as a mother to have to say, but I'm going to be honest with my kids because I don't want them spinning their wheels trying to get a job that I know is not going to go to them. And you see and you hear more and more all the time about young men being depressed or young men considering suicide based on these kinds of things. So, we have a chance right now, I think. I think it's a hopeful time in our culture. We're coming into the holiday season. I think it's a hopeful time in our culture where we have a chance to fight back and to truly have religious freedom, which we are entitled to, by the way. Nobody gets to tell us what religion we are. Nobody gets to tell us we can't talk about whatever we want to talk about from the pulpit, clear down to politics. We have a chance right now also, I think, I want to speak for babies for just a minute. With the reversal of Roe versus Wade, we have a chance to teach our children that their life is valuable and does matter, and that it's not okay to kill our children. Child sacrifice is a really old thing in the Bible. This is not a new concept. We just packaged it up pretty and told everybody it was about women's rights when it's not. Because if it were, we'd be worried about the women in the womb, the little women. Mm-hmm.
Where do we go from there?
Let's take questions. I want to hear what they have to say.
Usually we end with a quote that...
Yes, but so the one thing that he told my producer that he was going to ask me was for my favorite quote. And I literally sent like 20 of them to Jason, and I said, which one should I pick? Because there's so many. I mean, I can't pick a favorite quote because there's so much scripture I love. If I start down that path, I'll never shut up, and you guys will be here till tomorrow, till we all fall asleep. So I can't do that. I love a lot of G.K. Chesterton's quotes. I realize his doctrine was off, but I like many of his quotes. I even like, there's a few quotes I like by some famous atheists. Nietzsche is one of them. People everywhere enjoy believing things they know are not true because it spares them the ordeal of thinking for themselves and then acting upon what they know. That's a Nietzsche quote, but no, that's not Nietzsche. Who is it? No, that's not Chesterton. No, that's not Chesterton. No, that's somebody else. But
how does a husband and wife argue in public?
We're doing it for you in real time now. But there are so many, and I just wouldn't even. I can't do that. I'm so sorry. I do quote. I collect quotes. I have quotes all over my notes on my phone, and I do quote stuff all the time on my show. So if you want to hear my good quotes, tune into my show from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern every single day, right before Steve Bannon. But yeah, I do tend to use quotes. I tend to crutch on them because they help me remember what I aspire to, what my current goals are in my life, and I think that changes throughout my life. But one of my favorites I've quoted in almost every speech I'm ever given that I'm not going to do tonight because it is long, but I usually close every speech with it, and this isn't a speech, this is just a conversation, an interview, but is Man in the Arena, Teddy Roosevelt. I love Man in the Arena, and I used to feel like nobody had ever heard of it, now I feel like everyone's heard of it. You guys all know Man in the Arena? Yeah, if you don't, look it up, it's fantastic. Read Sun Tzu, Read The Art of War, that's a good one. Read Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. Definitely read your Bible, more importantly, I should have said that first. And yeah, read Teddy Roosevelt's Man in the Arena. It's not long, it's just a little paragraph or two, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being on our show tonight.
Thank you.
Thank Dr. Gina Loudon.
Thank you.